Hi, everybody. I hope you guys are doing great. I'm really excited to get this video out to you. A lot of you have asked me for extra information on this Pluto return for 2022, and I wanted to give it I know there are a lot of videos out there right now about it. Um, I wanted to give a little bit more of a historical lens, not only the revolution. I want to discuss even further back, having to do with the Roman Empire and what went on in England. I think that we're going to be able to gain a lot of really good illustrations from those points in time and see some very clear mirroring. Even though it was so long ago, the human condition is so interesting how cyclical we are. So we do have this Pluto return that's hitting officially on the 20th. But, I know a lot of people have been emailing me saying, but Jackie, Pluto's been in Saturn since 2008 and my life's been tough since then, right? And I totally hear you. So we're going to break this down. Hopefully you guys will be able to understand. First, we're going to talk about what it means to approach and separate from a particular energy, because it's super important to understand why is it a big deal now and not just in 2008. And then we're going to take again a historical perspective. I'm going to go into how I feel like it's going to be impacting the United States on a national level. Then I'm going to go a little more specific for those of you who are up for it. I'm going to explain to you how you can look at your own chart. And I'm even going to speak to those of you who don't know the exact time that you were born, so that you could garner some more personal information so that you can understand how this is going to be rolling out for you. Because guys, this is not like Venus and Mars transit or Mercury or whatever, we're talking about really, the jury's out, right, as far as what the exact time frame is. So let's just say, keeping it safe, it only happens every 245 to 250 years. Does it really matter? Right? It is a once in a lifetime kind of jam that we're going to have going on. So let's get into talking about what all of this means. So again, I'm going to speak generally, walk us through history for a bit, bring us down to the United States and how it's going to be rolling out, guys. It's going to be impacting everyone, and I will explain why, even if you don't live in the US. And then we're going to go more personal. And guys, this is the thing, I'm going to be doing examples of how you can use your chart to gain more information specifically. So I'm going to be using some techniques that I use when I do my private readings, and I'm going to be using President Joe Biden's chart to do this. And I do want to say, going into this, this is not at all in any way, shape, or form a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, no issue, no politics. We're just looking at the transits. We're looking at the energy surrounding our leaders. We're looking at history, and we're just going to sit and just look at the stuff. All right. And this is when we get to the personal interpretations, it's my own view. I could be wrong. Lord knows I have been before. Right. So take it with a grain of salt, guys, but really interesting stuff. So let's dig right into it. Let's dig right in. And let's get back to, first of all, let's start with the basics. What does it even mean? What does it mean when a planet returns? It means it goes back to that original space that it was in when it was born. So we have our solar return every 365 days, otherwise known as our birthday, right? We have our Saturn return, happens like 2 or 3 times in our lifetime. No one's ever happy about that. But our first one's around age 28. Another one, those of us who are in our 50s. I'm going to be 55 in June. So I'm getting ready. My Saturn return is going to be heading in another few years. Those of you in your late 50s, you may be in that Saturn return, so the returns are always a return to that original space. And it's a little check-in and see, so how you doing? How'd you make out in your life up to this point? And it's almost like this checkpoint, right? So that's what it is for that. But then Pluto, again, only once in a lifetime, 245 to 250 years. Keep in mind that the orb is pretty big here. So it's not a one and done kind of thing. And that's why, yeah, it hit in 2008, but it's taking so long to roll out. And I think that's going to be better explained when I get to the historical aspects of it all. So you'll be able to put it in a very healthy framework for yourself as far as how to apply this just to life in general. And I know most of us are just interested and concerned with our own planet returns and what's impacting us on a very personal level. And that's typically how I roll my readings out. I do very interpersonal stuff. And when I mentioned that, when I was doing my nodal return video, I got so many emails asking to address this on a more global level. So why not? Let's do it. It'll be fun. So we need to understand from a national point of view anyway. I mean, it's important to understand what everybody, where everybody's energy is like, what is going on with your nation's chart, right? It's very important to understand. So in the US, the birth date is July 4th, 1776 is the final day of it. Yes, it was written a few days before. Those of you who are true scholars understand that. There was kind of like a lot of editing that went on, but we understand that July 4th, 1776, at approximately 10 minutes after 5 p.m., everything was signed. So we have to consider that the birth of our nation, right? And so what does that mean? That means that the United States has a Sagittarius rising, it's Cancer sun. So you just need to look at this chart. And if you know what the houses mean, man, does this make sense? It really does. It's a lot of fun to sit down and just go back through history and understand like this. There's so many indicators to indicate that, yes, this is in fact the chart. Now, again, Pluto went to Capricorn in 2008, and that is when the shift truly began. Even though the exact return is set to take place this month on the 20th. But again, and I know this is going to sound very sort of macro, but it takes about a decade for things to roll out, which will make sense again when we get to the historical point. But why this is so important to understand when we're talking about an astrology approaching and separating, it's like you're walking down a block, right? And the address is whatever home is present in the middle of the block. You just start the block. So you have to walk down that block, right? You have to walk there. You have to pass other homes first. So you can't really even see the house that you're supposed to be visiting. You're not sure, right? Or the home that you're going home to, right? In the case of Pluto, not sure. It's been a long time. It's been 200 and something years since you've been home, right? So you're walking there, you're on your way. That's what we've been doing since 2008. Well, now we're at the front door. We're at the front door. This is what's going on. Okay. So we've been walking up to this point since 2008. We're at the front door, and now we're about to walk in. And then we have to see what the hell we're going to find on the other side. So hopefully that is a helpful way of actually looking at it. So what is this all going to mean? I mean, look, even if you don't live in the United States, the changes that are going to be going on here are going to have very far-reaching circumstances. And consequences, especially since the US is going to be having this return in the second house, which happens to be the home of Taurus. What does Taurus represent? The money that we make from the work that we do, our sense of self. Think about this on a national level, how we feed ourselves, literally. Yes, I'm going to be talking about the agriculture situation going on here, but also metaphorically. How do we feed ourselves? How do we nurture ourselves? What are our value systems? What's our work ethic like? What's our ethic in life like? Right? As well as the Taurus energy, the second house energy is also where we start to unfold ancestral patterning. And we're faced always in our second house with this idea: are we going to perpetuate ancestral patterning that's been set up? Or are we going to totally change it? Or are we going to use our reason and say, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater? Maybe certain things were a certain way in our past, in our family, in our history, in our people, because of circumstance, because whatever was going on there. But there was a lot of value to be had as well. So there could be a lot of this sort of siphoning through and going through the weeds again, and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So what there is going to be is this sort of paying attention to our past. This is certainly going to be, because the past is going to be coming up. We're going to have to look at it right now. The past is going to be a thing. Okay. Pretty much, but no, for everyone. Okay. So what else did I want to say here? I took some notes if you see me looking down. Oh, on top of that also, I mean, what is sitting opposite this Taurus energy, the second house energy, what sits opposite the second house, the eighth house? Who's the landlord of the eighth house? Scorpio. Where's the south node of the moon now? Scorpio. Where's the north node of the moon? Taurus. Guys, I mean, this is why I sort of flippantly mentioned it when I did the nodal video, but this is flipping huge. Once in a lifetime Pluto return, which is all about change, we're going to talk about that, is happening while we're moving into this nodal axis, which is going to be happening until middle of July 2023. So I really think there are going to be very profound changes between now and the middle of July of 2023. There's no question. And there's just this Pluto return is just going to create a lot of tension on that axis, right? So that second house, eighth house axis, Taurus, even though it's happening in Capricorn, okay, we're talking about from a national point of view, from the United States point of view, Pluto is in Capricorn, but it's in the home of Taurus. So we have to understand that. The fact that it's in Capricorn is only half the story. Where is it happening? It's happening on the money axis. Second house, eighth house is the money axis. It's your money and it's other money. It's the money that you make from the work that you do. And then it's money that you maybe have to pay out to taxes, to any sort of debt. So there's going to be this idea of money. There's going to be this idea of stock market implications, because the eighth house is stock market, which again is in tension across the wheel here. So all kinds of financial situations we're going to have to be looking at on a very personal level and on a more macro level, right? We're all going to be looking at cycles. We're going to be looking at the past. We're going to be looking at anxiety. We're going to be looking at self-sabotage. We're going to be looking at secrets. So many secrets are going to be coming out. So there are many, many ways, obviously, that this can end up manifesting, but that is the energy of this particular Pluto return. Now, Pluto can be described in very general terms as transformation, right? We always go there. It's like death, regeneration, birth, death, birth, regeneration, all of that, right? The pitfalls and the potentials of power, the confronting of shadows, all of these things. But this is the important thing to understand with Pluto. And this is not me being negative, guys. This is just like a slice of life reality. When we're talking about Pluto, we're talking about transformation. Keep in mind, Pluto rules Scorpio. Pluto is the modern ruler of Scorpio. The original ruler of Scorpio is Mars. So we have this energy of, which is the Tower card. So we have this idea of, and not to cut myself off, but in tarot, the Pluto energy is all about judgment, right? So it's assessing the past and recognizing that whatever it is cannot continue. There's got to be a sacrifice to the way that something's been perpetuating, when something's been rolling out, because the way that it's been up to that point is not meant for us to continue on that trajectory, because it's like on the road to combust, right? Even if it feels good in the moment, even if not everybody sees the same thing. And again, everyone's eyes are going to look at everything very differently, very subjectively in a particular way. And I do believe this is my perspective only, that it has a lot to do with what's aspecting your chart and where your retrogrades are. And, we all have a couple, at least, in our natal retrograde. How clearly we're able to actually see a lot of these things in front of us. And that's why some people are, well, we could almost perceive to be as almost like very revolutionary in their understanding of things. Whereas other people are a lot more like, no, they want to believe more. They want to have faith, right, in what it is. So, but what happens here with Pluto return is everything, the whole flipping roof gets taken off the house. You know what I'm saying? And I think such a good, we need history to really understand this. So I want to get right into this. Let's look at Rome and let's look at England really first, and then we'll talk about more localized, which everybody's kind of talking about, the revolution and all of that, and which is really interesting and very relevant. But I want to break it down even further here. So let's check out Pluto returning in the Roman Empire. And why do I think that this is really better to look at? Because they've had more of them than us. You know what I mean? They've had more than one. So I think to look at how like the second Pluto return can help take care of what the first Pluto return didn't, didn't take care of is very, very interesting. So if we accept what we've been taught in school, those of us who are scholars, and by the way, thank you for watching this, because you guys know I did take off a semester from teaching. So I have to teach. It's in my bones. So I wanted to get this out there in a kind of a teachery way, hopefully not too dogmatic. But anyway, let's talk about 27 BCE. This is the start of the Roman Empire. And this is bringing Pluto's first return. And we're talking about the years like 2016 to 2023 AD. 2016, yes, 2016 to 2023 AD. And this is a period of incredible instability and change associated with the Severan dynasty, when a very, very unpopular emperor was reigning between this 4-year period of 218 to 222 AD. So it's documented. And his rule was messy. And he was a huge, monstrous narcissist. He really was. Lots of narcissistic type of shenanigans went on there, sex scandals, lots of religious and religious controversies, legal controversies. It was a bad show. And the very strange, but very, very infamous situation where he flooded a banquet room, and this is going to sound weird, with rose petals, suffocating these people. I mean, this is what's been documented. It's almost hard to understand, because you could say, well, can't you just move out of the way? Well, it was like a perfect storm. There were too many people in there. He flooded it. This is a story. This is documented, that he flooded the room with rose petals, and they were smothered. And so it's documented that he and his mother were kind of taken out back impromptu to an open assassination by a Praetorian Guard. So with him gone, Severus took over until 235 AD. And now when Severus took over, everyone was really, really hopeful, really happy, really like, oh, breath of fresh air, happy with the ideas, until they no longer were. And he was also assassinated then with his mother, which is a very interesting thing to me. Like they would assassinate these people with their mother. Right, ladies, good thing we're born when we did. If we have any challenges with our kids there, but that ended the Severan dynasty. And a lot of scholars do identify that as the crisis of the 3rd century, where a lot of incapables, like one right after another, military emperors came in, rebellious generals, counterclaimants, presiding over a lot of governmental chaos. There was a lot of civil war, a lot of general instability, economic disruption. So that was Pluto's first return there, definitely a messy time. And it took, again, several years, obviously, to build up. Now, the empire's second Pluto return, that happened in like 461 to 468 AD. And that was a period of extreme turmoil when the empire was increasingly threatened by forces at its borders. Okay, so a few years before that, though, in around 455 AD, a bunch of vandals, very out of control vandals, entered into Rome and just ransacked the hell out of it. While at the Battle of Capricorn on 468 AD, the Vandals then destroyed a combined Western and Roman invasion fleet. So it was like they went after the entire fleet. It's like they knew where to go, knew where to get the core. Right. But it wasn't until several years later, during the reign of the very morally compromised Flavius, the very famous Flavius from 476 to 493 AD, that the Roman Empire finally went into its final and full collapse. And that truly is such an illustrated of energy of Pluto return. It takes it down to the studs. And then it's got to kind of wipe everything away and say, now what? Let's rebuild from fresh, Sometimes transformation, sometimes demise. It does depend on what is going on. So now let's pop over to Britain, the British Empire. So England, to me, is a great example of how Pluto return works, since they had 3 of them. So they had 3. So let's go through, and And let's just check out like the big things that happen in each of these points. So if we use coronation of William the Conqueror on Christmas Day, December 25th of 1066, as the birth of modern England, the first of those returns, and I'm allowing for some astrological adjustments there, occurred around the first one, 1311 to 1315, and the second from 1555 to 1562, while the last of those kind of rolled out in around 1801 to 1810. So let's go one at a time and just discuss the highlights of each of those. So the first return brought a ton of very serious environmental issues. Sure you guys heard the Great Famine. I mean, that was so destructive, and that happened in 1315, and that caused a lot of social unrest throughout for years, and it was the death of millions and millions of people. And that happened shortly after the separation of the Scots from England. So this was a really big deal also on a political front, right? Now, the second return, that was a significant turning point in the empire's history for a couple of reasons. First, the major insurrection in Kent in 1554, with the widespread persecution of Protestants in 1555. And then, of course, the ascension of Queen Mary I, the iconic Queen Mary I to the throne. She reigned from 1553 until she died in 58. But that marked her as the first non-jointly ruling female of the monarch of England. So that was a very big deal at the time. And that was followed by the ascension of Elizabeth I to the throne in 58, which brought a lot of unwanted high drama, both for her and the nation. A time that's bookended by the beheading of Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, and the very infamous standoff between Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots. So there's a lot of history that was generated during that time. And that period birthed the Elizabethan era. And that's just been known, a lot of people just know that to be the golden age in English history, which, by the way, was coined by a very famous astrologer. So, but the golden age was big for not only for English history, but also literature. And it's, it's categorized by badasses such as like Billy Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe, Edward Spencer, and I could go on and on here, but let's stay on the point. So much good stuff came out of that period, in my opinion, classic stuff. But the Plutonian influence is pretty apparent here when we consider how Elizabeth took an essentially bankrupt economy and restored fiscal prosperity and fiscal responsibility to it, while simultaneously overseeing a great surge in global exploration. I mean, there was a lot of exploring that was going on there, and transformation of a very unstable landscape into a period, like, let's just say relative to what was going on, relative stability and internal peace to the country, and relative to what it was. Maybe it's not going to be without issue, right? Because there were these long-standing animosities at that point between the Catholics and the Protestants. Those still simmered and they lingered, and it was just always sort of right underneath the surface. And that led to a lot of assassination attempts on Elizabeth's life. There were assassins. There was a lot of like attempted treachery that goes on. So remember, assassins, the mob, anything like that, they're very Plutonian because they're very under the earth, right? We look at anything that's like shady and sort of on the periphery of society. It's all very Plutonian. So England's third return, that happened in 1801 to 1810, right? It's very, and by the way, this was happening not in Capricorn for them, by the way. For them, it's in Pisces. Those of you, I know a lot of my viewers live in England, so for those of you, it's in Pisces. Let's bullet this one because there's a ton, right? So first industrial revolution from around 1750 to about 1830. 1801 specifically saw the formal creation of the United Kingdom. Lots of military conflicts went down in an effort to hold the empire together. Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, Napoleonic War in 1803 to 1815, the Peninsula War from 1808 to 1814, the Anglo-Russian War, the Anglo-Swedish War, the 1812 conflict with the newly independent United States of America. And then, of course, we had in 1810, the famed madness of King George. That guy's very important, very interesting story, rather. You should check out what went on with King George. It's very fascinating. But he was slipping in and out of dementia, you know, and was formally recognized as insane in 1810. I don't know if he was insane or if he just had dementia. You know what I'm saying? There is a big difference. So anyway, but that's for another conversation. But there's another development around this period in English history that's very easily overlooked, but I think is very crucial in understanding America's own Pluto return right now. And to see that, though, we need to step back and look something which began under England's the previous Pluto return, the second one. Earlier in the reign of Elizabeth I, the empire saw the formal inauguration of its slave trade, right, under the direction of Sir John Hawkins. And a lot of people do consider him the father of that, right, in that particular part of the world. Truly the nefarious shadow side of that era's golden age. I mean, so many great things happened, but that happened too. So then more than 2 centuries later, it officially came to its end during Pluto's next return with the passing of the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807, directly in the middle of England's third Pluto return in Pisces. And what is Pisces? Sacrificial energy. Where are you being sacrificed? Where are you being martyred? Where are there unclear boundaries about how things should be, right? So even though the inception of it was during a Pluto return, not so great, right? That next Pluto return corrected it. Makes sense? So that's why I think this is pretty interesting to look at here. And it's not difficult to see the Plutonian character of this development in both positive and negative respects. On the one hand, that slave trade showed, the slave trade showed England acting out its really darkest impulses, right? Having to do with human nature, because they're there. And that's part of Pluto, is that dark part of human nature that is in all of us, you know, in one way or another, with all of its bigotry and its cruelty and its greed. And then the abolition of slavery during that third Pluto return, which is a lot more redemptive. But regardless, Pluto transits often do involve digging up and looking at some unresolved darkness or transgression from the past, right? We have to do that. Otherwise, we're never going to evolve. And if it's honestly confronted to resolve the hidden and dark issues, the effect can be absolutely positive, completely transformative. And again, I think we could agree to that if we're looking at the progression of things from way back in the origination of some of these original Pluto returns. But if not, then it's more likely that those unresolved issues will consume and literally destroy from within. So part of the human condition is we have choice. So we have to see how this ends up rolling out. So that's how it impacted those areas. So now let's just take a little peek at our own history here in the United States. So the American colonists broke with the British Empire in 1776. It was not sudden, right? It wasn't this sudden sort of impetuous, like, I just want to be away from you. It wasn't like that. This was kind of slow and steady in the building. And again, thinking about the fact that Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008, this is what I'm saying. Like I'm just going to pull out like, 6 or 7 things that I feel like primarily led up to that point. And then, think about what we've been going through since 2008 and see if you can't, associate some mirrorings. But back at that point, it's the banding together of 13 colonies to fight and win the war of independence against the crown was the culmination of the series of events, which began, though, again, about a decade earlier than that. The escalations began pretty shortly after the French and Indian War, otherwise known as the 7-Year War, and that happened in 1763. And the rise in taxes and the cost of living and all of these things sound familiar, right? But these were all the things that sort of started it. It was like that's what kind of got the just the members of society started to say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? So first, we have to look at the Stamp Act, right? That was in 1765. So to recoup some of the massive debt over the war with France, the Parliament passed laws called the Stamp Act, which for the first time, a wide taxing was put into into place. But up until that point, each of the colonies, they decided how they were going to deal with their own taxes, right? But Parliament felt that they spent a lot of blood and a lot of energy, right, protecting the colonists from the Indians. So these people should have to pay their share. But the colonists did not agree, and they resented not only being made during that time to buy stuff from Britain, right? They had to buy all this stuff from the Brits, but also pay tax on them as well. It was like they felt like they were being doubled whammy. The thing is, though, what's interesting is the tax never got collected because there were riots everywhere. And then ultimately, Benjamin Franklin convinced the Brits to rescind. But the messaging this sent was, we can get over on you. We could push back. We can get more of what we want. Right? So it sort of empowered the people a bit. Second thing I want to look at is the Townshend Act, and that happened between June and July of 1767. So here, Townshend Act, Parliament again tried to assert its authority by passing more legislation to tax goods. It was always about, they were very tax happy back then, to having anything between like on the Americans having to do with anything from Great Britain. And that was tricky because they were being forced to get everything from there. So it was like an additional tax on a tax. So the Crown established a board of customs commissioners to stop smuggling and corruption among local officials in the colonies who were often in on the illicit trade. But America struck back by organizing a boycott of the British goods that were subject to taxation. And they started harassing the British customs commissioners. And in an effort to kind of chill out the resistance, the British sent troops to occupy Boston, which only deepened the resentment. So you see, you could feel it, right? So these first two things, it was just this building animosity. Then, of course, next up, we have the Boston Massacre in March of 1770. So lots of growing tension between the Brit occupiers and the Boston residents at this point finally peaked on one late afternoon, when a disagreement broke out between an apprentice wigmaker and a British soldier. And this led to a crowd of 200 colonists surrounding 7 British troops. And when the Americans began taunting the Brits and throwing stuff at them, the soldiers apparently lost their cool and just started shooting crazy into the crowd. And when everything settled down and the smoke cleared, 3 men, including an African-American sailor named Crispus Atticus, it's Attcus, I believe. I am saying that correctly. Atticus, Attcks, Atticus. Coolest name ever, though. I need to figure out how to say that. But anyway, he passed. Okay, they were found dead, and 2 others were mortally wounded. So the massacre, anyway, so there was 1 dead, 2 mortally wounded, and that massacre became, and guys, to think about what I'm about to say, became a propaganda tool for the colonists, especially after Paul Revere came in and started saying a lot of negative stuffs about the Brits, and that they were opportunistic aggressors. And it was like the culmination of this person's passing away, recognition, remembering the whole situation with the tax. And now here's Paul Revere coming in, depicting the Brits as these very opportunistic aggressors. So it was the combination of these things that drove the propaganda, that drove the narrative at that point to a very heightened. So it wasn't only one thing. I mean, it was unfortunate that this person died and that the other 2 were injured, and that the taxes were happening, but it was this, and then on top of that, and then on top of that, and then on top of that, right? Isn't that kind of like what we've been going through here, right, for the past couple of years? I mean, that should have never happened, but it did. And so taking that and then trying to make change from that. Then we have the Boston Tea Party in December of 1773. So the Brits finally withdrew their forces from Boston, and they repealed a lot of the legislation that they put in place. So good. Things were going in a better direction, except for one thing, the tax on tea. And in 1773, that enacted a new law called the Tea Act, right, to help out the financially struggling British East India Company. The act gave the company extended favorable treatment under tax regulation. So here was this company that was already big, doing really well, and then they were going to go give them more tax breaks. So the act gave them these breaks so that it could sell the tea at a price that undercut the American merchants who imported from Dutch traders. That did not sit well with the Americans. So you understand what I'm saying? Like, let's give this foreign company breaks so that they could sell their product for less than the people making it in America can. Okay, so yeah, the Americans were not happy at all. And it wasn't only about being told that if they wanted tea, they had to buy it from them, because that was a thing too, but more so because Americans really wanted to be able to trade with any country they wanted. They wanted to just be able to go in and trade, and they weren't able to. They had all of these restrictions on them. So the Sons of Liberty, a radical group, decided to confront the Brits head on. And they were disguised as with Mohawks, right? And with these kind of like these Indians, right? And they boarded 3 ships in the Boston Harbor, and they destroyed more than 92,000 pounds of British tea by stumping it into the harbor. Many of us do know the story. But there's got to be a very important point made here. Then this is very important if we're going to kind of match up then and now. They were very clear. They were not vandals. They were rebels with a cause. They avoided harming any of the crew. They didn't damage any of the ships themselves. And the next day, they even replaced a padlock, a single padlock that they broke. So there was no vandalism. There was no setting fires and going bananas under the guise of some sort of ideology. They were rebels with a cause. Nevertheless, the act of defiance really ticked off the British government, since a lot of the East India Company shareholders were members of parliament. So it was like these people that they were giving breaks to, they actually owned shares in that company. So they each had paid £1,000 sterling. That would be about $1 million today for a share of the company, to get in a piece of the action that they were going to end up forcing down the throats of the colonists at the time. So when these lowly working folk, right, of society in Boston destroyed the tea, that was like a serious thing to them, is they wanted these people to pay, which ends up leading to the next point, the Coercive Act, right? This happened from March to June of 1774. So in response to this, the British government decided that it had to tame the rebels. So in the spring of 74, Parliament passed a series of laws called the Coercive Acts, which closed Boston Harbor until restitution was paid for the tea. It's like you can't trade until that's paid off. And that replaced they replaced the colony's elective council with one appointed by the Brits. So basically, the person that was in charge was replaced by somebody who was with the British, with the Brits, and they gave sweeping powers to the British military. Governor General Thomas Gage, a lot of us have studied him, and forbade town meetings without approval. Like they weren't even allowed to meet out in the open without approval. They were really being so controlled. But now, to add insult to injury here, the outrageous provision was put in place for the Brits called the Quartering Act, which allowed British military officials to demand accommodations, check this out, for their troops in unoccupied homes in the area and buildings, rather than having to stay out in the countryside. So they come here, right? They're occupying, but they don't want it, they need a place to stay, right? So instead of staying on the many fields or anything like that, they're like, no, we have to, not only do we have to be put up in any homes or buildings that are empty, but guess what? You guys also have to actually pay the expenses for housing and feeding our soldiers. So not only were the Americans not able to have access to their stuff, right, that was rightfully theirs, then they had to pay for these people to come in and stay in their country while they were sort of being taken over. It's very interesting, right? So the quartering of troops eventually became one of the main grievances cited in the Declaration of Independence, because that was a pretty big thing. And then next we have the Lexington and Concord, right? Which the situation would happen with Lexington and Concord. And this happened in 1775. So Gage led a force of British soldiers to Boston, from Boston to Lexington, where he planned to capture the radical leaders, Sam Adams and John Hancock, and then head to Concord and seize their gunpowder, right? Can't do much without gunpowder back then. So American spies got wind of the plan, and with the help of writers such as Paul Revere, they spread the words, to get ready for the Brits. On the Lexington Common, the British The British force was confronted by 77 American militiamen, and they began shooting at each other, and 7 Americans died. I mean, how crazy is the number 7 in all of this? Which is where heaven meets earth. Okay. But other militiamen managed to stop the British at Concord as well. And they continued the harassment. They continued the argument. They continued the uproar, and the British ended up losing 73 with another 174 wounded, 26 MIA at that point. And the bloody encounter ended up proving to the Brits that these people were no one to mess with. They were not afraid. The people who were fighting, they were basic people who were just looking to live with their liberties and their freedom and make a living. They were uprising. And it was at this point where the Brits were like, man, we got to pay attention. And that right there was the start of America's war for independence. And then the Brits attack on the coastal towns. That happened between the fall of 75 and the winter of 76. The hostility started in Lexington and Concord, but it wasn't really clear, at least initially, who was getting on board with the fight. And I think this idea is very mirrored right now as well, guys, in society. Like, who's on whose side? Who's willing to do what? The Southern colonies didn't necessarily have the same ideologies as the Northern colonies, which is interesting because they were all Americans, right? Right. But the South and the North, they couldn't agree. So it was very interesting here, right? I mean, the Northern colonies were very dependent on the Brits to buy their crops, and the New Englanders thought that the Southerners were lazy. And it was just this true divide. I mean, it does sound familiar, right? But then the brutal British naval bombardments and the burning of the coastal towns of Falmouth, Massachusetts, Norfolk, Virginia helped to unify these people, because it was like, oh my gosh, they were coming at us, and what are we going to do? If like it was like them saying, okay, if we're going to be okay, we have to work together. North, South, it doesn't matter. We're all Americans who are very concerned right now about losing their country. So it couldn't be ignored any longer. It was like it was at that precipice. So they either had to get the hell over themselves and refocus, or accept the fact that they were going to be swallowed up whole. And in Falmouth, residents had to grab their possessions and run for their lives. And I mean, it was just, things were like literally like, things were very bad. It was very real. It was very in their face. And the Northerners kind of had to face up to the fact that, well, if they're doing it to them, then they could certainly do it to us. So there's a lot going on. Like, a lot of areas were just getting burnt up. What was kind of tricky was that there was these ideologies going on that the Brits were trying to convince the slaves, if you come and fight for us, we will free you. So your answer to being okay is to join our side. So it's almost like, if you do this, then that kind of thing. And that was very scary for the residents at that point, right? And it wasn't even like the slaves wanted to do that, believed in their ideologies. It wasn't even like that. It was just like, well, if I'm going to be free, so you kind of go, all right, could kind of see the point here. But leaders of the rebellion seized the burning of the 2 ports that were being attacked. And they, look, all the colonists realized they had to band together for survival against the ruthless enemy and embrace the need for independence. And that spirit is ultimately what led to their victory. It was once everybody got out of their own way and they decided to come and join and work together, that it was able to happen. So I do believe that part is so important for us to understand, not just what happened, but what was going on in the psychology within these communities during that time that's going to be mirrored now. Right? We can only hope. So let's talk about the implications for the United States right now. And again, this is my perspective, understanding the astrology that we can expect in the years ahead. And these are just a few possibilities that I suggest we watch out for, particularly over the next decade. One effect of the Pluto return for America is most certainly going to be economic. I mean, it does make sense. After all, this is happening. First of all, what does Capricorn represent? Capricorn represents the government. Represents long-term goals. It also represents how we show up based on where we've been, right? Because Capricorn is the landlord of the 10th house, sitting opposite that 4th house energy, and the 4th house rules where we've been, our early environment, why we do what we do. And that's when when we look at that 10th house Capricorn, energy. We always have to make that connection between our earlier experience informs how we're showing up now. And with Pluto in there, it's like, all right, what story we're going to keep going with? What needs to be changed and transformed, you know? So because it's happening in Capricorn, having to do with the government, and because it's on the axis of money, there's going to be a lot of interesting things rolling out. And this is what I expect. I expect there to be very dramatic shifts in the stock market. I expect there to be very dramatic shifts having to do with anything that we pretend to value. So that would be anything regarding real estate, regarding anything that's cyclical as well. Lots of changes in our tax structure because again, it's on this money axis, right? So it's very second house, eighth house. So that eighth house, there's going to be this. So Pluto, the Pluto return is in tension with taxes, debt, the stock market, investments, money coming to us from other people, our engagement as a unit, engaging in a blending of our money, our communication. There's got to be huge transformation here. So absolutely on an economic level, this is without question in my mind. I think that I'm going to do a separate video having to do with March 3rd. I mean, we have March 3rd. It's going to be a big energy is going to be kicking off because this energy is going to be stellium, right, between with exact stellium between Venus, Mars, and this Pluto return in the second house. So I think this is going to be a very interesting time for us to see. The next thing that I want to, and I don't want to labor too much on that. As things roll out, I will address that more in my readings. The second thing is, and this is based not only on those earlier Pluto returns of both Rome and England, but on what we already see happening in the US. It's safe to say that the growing mood of social unrest in the country, possibly bordering on even like a civil war type of atmosphere, is likely growing. I think we kind of feel this. There's a little question that the feelings surrounding these circumstances are very strong, and potentially violent. Emotions bubbling up to the surface these next few years, there's no question. And what could possibly trigger such an extreme level of anger and unrest? I think there are several things that can. I mean, we have rising costs of everything right now, not feeling like we have all of the answers to everything, just wanting the truth. And it's really, that's a bipartisan thing. Whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, a libertarian, who cares? Some of you just want the truth. Like what's really going on? And that right there is going to be the focus. Things feeling like who is really pulling the puppet strings here? That's the kind of energy that we're going to be working through. So in addition to hot button issues like, you know, everything that I've been talking about, I mean, we have other things like obviously abortion, immigration, political corruption, income inequality, the increased crime and inflation is becoming more evident every day. I don't care which side of the aisle you stand on. This is a factual reality to anyone paying attention. Anyone paying attention. It's a factual reality. And yet it's like, no, this isn't really happening. Like the gaslighting that goes on is insulting, you know, for those of us who are like, wow, I was paying $4.75 for a bag of licorice. And now all of a sudden it's over $7. What the hell happened? My husband filled up his car with gas yesterday and paid $115. Like what? So we could go on about that, right? But let's go on to the next point. As I pointed out during that last Pluto return in England, that was embroiled with a number of military conflicts in various parts of the world. So it's possible that America, we could definitely find ourselves in a similar situation, regardless with who. And I'm not even going to, I mean, there are some obvious players right now, obvious, like the Ukraine situation with Russia, China, whatever, but I feel like more likely, considering the more covert and underhanded side of Pluto, because Pluto is very covert, it's very under, right? Um, this could just as easily manifest through acts of sabotage, terrorism, cyber terrorism, more germ warfare. I'm going to tell you why that scares me a little bit. And again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. You guys know that. I'm just saying that Scorpio South Node happens to be in the 12th house of the hidden, ruled by Neptune. Neptune rules noxious agents. This is sextiling this return. I'm just saying that we need to just get ready and not be shocked if there's something else. But it doesn't even have to be that. Again, I'm just saying, like, that doesn't surprise, none of these things would surprise me. The cyber terrorism, the whatever, any kind of covert sabotage, right? You know, when we could see a striking example of Pluto at work in the events of 9/11, where the attack itself may have been out in the open, but perceived, you know, but the perceived enemy was like anonymous. We didn't know where it was coming from. And life as we knew it was very upended, especially for those of us who live in New York, even more so for those of us who have lived and worked close by, who lost loved ones. I mean, I've shared, I think once on here, 9/11, I was literally on my elliptical machine. I was like a Standmaster at the time, working out. My kids were napping. My kids who are now going to be 22, but they were in napping. And my cardio, I mean, I had a TV right here and was looking at these French doors that had a view of Manhattan, that had a view of the towers. And I remember I was watching Katie Couric on the news, and I was watching something, and then Katie Couric broke in and announced that the towers had gone down. And it was so surreal because, well, I see, you know, and then all of a sudden I see the second one look like a toy plane going in. So surreal. I just knew in that moment, life shifted. There was no question. There was no question. It was very difficult. It was like a nearly paralyzing sense of powerlessness in our ability to get a grip on the situation. And more so than that, like, what was the correct resolution of it all, right? So that sense of powerlessness, this is one of the key signatures of challenging this challenging Pluto aspect, the key signature there. So it's a lot of, isn't that very much how we felt when COVID hit, right? Powerless, confused, scared. Again, I don't say this to incite fear. It's simply pointing out the obvious here, right? So the next thing I wanted to mention is, falling as it does in Capricorn, you know, government, public reputation, standing in the world. This return strongly points to explosive scandals or falls from grace involving prominent individuals, be those politicians, not only politicians, celebrities, religious authorities, any business leaders. Previously hidden corruption, including sex crimes and possibly even treasonous activities, is definitely going to come out. And haven't we been seeing this lead up? Again, Capricorn's, Pluto's been in Capricorn since 2008. So just look at everything. And we could probably go on, but like most recent, right? Jeffrey Epstein, that's still evolving. Harry Weinstein, still evolving, right? There's still connections being made to that whole kind of thing. Of course, the Me Too movement. Kevin Spacey, Dustin Hoffman, Ben Affleck, Mario Battaldi, even the Cuomo brothers. Like, people just can't get away with what they once did. You know, circumstances surrounding it, not surrounding it, whatever. This is what ended up coming to light. People came forward, and this is what happened. And of course, the revisiting of possible misconduct is going to be going on, having to do with family and friends of our current leaders. It's going to be happening, guys. However you think, however, whatever rolled out, you know, I don't want to have my video pulled, so I don't want to say much more than that. I think some of you can, you know, fill in the blanks there. But a lot of this stuff is going to be coming out. Explanations are needed. And I think we can all, just explanations. Just like, if that wasn't a thing, then what was it? Do you know what I mean? And like, let's just pull the Band-Aid off already and deal with that. But besides Pluto return pushing secrets into the light, the US has that Scorpio South Node, like I mentioned, in that 12th house of the hidden, which is blurred boundaries, which is addictions and secrets and things like that coming to light. And I'm just communicating an analysis, okay? Next point out, especially since Pluto return is occurring in the earthy second house, another likely impact I do believe is going to be environmental in nature, because keep in mind it's in the home of Taurus, and Taurus is the energy that rules the food that we put in our body. So I really do believe there's going to be a lot more exposure, a lot more recognition and problem solving. I'm really hoping at the other side of this, on the other side of this, when it comes to the toxins in our food and the way in which we grow things. I could do an entire video on this. This is something I'm very passionate about. I've actually themed semester-long classes in my writing classes based on the environment and our food. When I'm still teaching, I'm just taking a semester off, but when I teach, and I love it because, you know, my students always walk away learning more about, you know, how our food is prepared and how and what's going on with our poor farmers and how they're strong-armed and how you know, they're not allowed to reuse seeds and a lot of the toxins that they're sort of forced to use. And it's like, all right, well, either use this or starve kind of thing. And so there's a lot of, so it's not only, and this is what I see happening, not only will it be this addressing of the toxins, of what's happening on a very fundamental level, right, coming to the surface, but also who's strong-arming who, right? So I do see that happening, and even, you know, having to do with the pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers and all of that stuff, but also oil spills, problems with nuclear fuel sources. These are all possibilities that could certainly be rearing their head. Now, another effect that strikes me as worth mentioning centers around the growing threat of this idea of autocracy and this sort of dictatorship kind of sensibility. And it's no secret that Pluto can behave quite very much like the dictator at times. And we've already started seeing this, right, around the mandates that, you know, that can quite easily be understood as breaching our liberties. It can. I mean, I know a lot of people are of different minds. I mean, you know, and I think we're all sort of going through this learning process, but it is interesting to see to the point that it's being taken. You know, it's very hard to say that people are not having their liberties played. It's just very hard to say that in an honest way. The condescending idea that schools of thought have a monopoly on the truth will likely become even more of an issue that's going to end up continuing to divide and end friendships and even break up marriages. But a layered task is going to be thrown onto things, guys. This is the thing. It's not going to no longer be a thing where it's like, well, I believe in this, and how could you believe in that? And there's going to have to be this fundamental stripping down to the studs of looking at the truth. So any suppositions on ideologies is going to have to be backed up with facts. I mean, that's what it is. You want to think about Pluto as the biggest private investigator ever. It's the detective of the zodiac. It's the psychologist of the zodiac. It's let's get to the truth of it all. Because things have not been very truthful. There's been a lot of secrets. Secrets are very Plutonian. Secrets are also very 12th house. Secrets are also very Scorpio. These are things that we have very active in our nation's chart right now, right? So now it's like, all right, enough of that. Now it's time to unearth that stuff. Let's get to the facts and then see what's going on. So that the roof is going to blow off the top of a lot of people's houses when it comes to reality. And the only thing that we could actually hope for within ourselves is to stay grounded, exercise intellect, exercise, you know, forgiving oneself for maybe not seeing things, not realizing things, being compassionate with each other, having empathy for each other as fellow Americans, and just kind of figuring out a way of coming more together, you know, because credibility or lack thereof will be exposed, leading to a very interesting understanding that so much of what we've been told is simply not based in reality, just hasn't been. And that doesn't matter. I don't care which party you follow. Or maybe you don't believe in politics at all. Maybe it has something to do with like the environment or something like that. So there's something going on here that we're all going to be like, whoa, hold on a second, right? And the last possibility that I want to touch on harkens back to what happened with England during that early 19th century, that darkness from our past, right? And I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier when it comes to this Taurus idea of unpacking ancestral patterning. And so the big question here is like, what darkness from our past will we be contending with during these next few years? We are actively working on, 100%, we could all agree, working on the stain of slavery. We've only really begun to deal with, racism. Such a strange time of attempting to balance and understand it all right now, right? But guys, as an educator, I understand that people, wherever they are, at all times, are simply working with the tools that they have in their toolbox. So too often, those who don't possess developed emotional intelligence do not have a very full toolbox. But that's more often than not due to the time that they live in or the culture that they're developed in. And it's what's been mirrored back to them in early development. For example, like, I mean, this is a good example, is that, the fact that a man was allowed, this was an actual law, the fact that a man was allowed to chain his wife to a bed and beat her and have sex with her whenever he wanted and felt like it. And maybe he just felt like chaining her to the bed to beat her up just because, she wasn't allowed to divorce him. She wasn't allowed to own anything. She wasn't allowed to work. She couldn't, the right to vote came much later on. Guys, that was only 125 years ago. That wasn't that long ago. It wasn't until 1852 that kids were mandated to go to school. Why? Because so many of them were actually treated more like, and I'm talking about like general society. I'm not talking about the upper echelons, but the general energy in society was that children were born to work. Once they hit about 5 years old, you were like, yeah, come on now, your hands are good, let's go. But so many of them were like dying in chimneys and on farms, and like I said, they were the main chimney cleaners back then, and that was a big thing back then. They were more viewed as working hands and not valued for the hearts and the minds that they actually were. And this similar ignorant, demeaning, devastating and damaging ideologies underlay all historical atrocities, from slavery to all apartheid to all circumstances of Holocaust throughout history. This Pluto return will be calling us to task, to fine-tune any areas where any residue from these time periods live. There are so many deep, dark points in history, guys. There just are. And this is just part of human nature. It's not even a United States thing. We got the rape of Nanking. I mean, there were so many horrible things that have gone on, right? So this is going to be a time of being forced to look at that stuff and make some changes. And, for the people who are like, well, we've made all of these changes. A, B, and C doesn't exist. A, B, and C doesn't. Well, maybe we've made huge strides, but maybe we can do even better. Not even sure what that means, because it's a moving thing, right? We're all trying to work on it. We're all trying to figure it out. We are. I mean, there's no question. Women still don't make the same amount as men in many, many industries. It's not totally streamlined. It's not. There is still some racism that goes on. That's fact. Against many. Not only Black people, Jewish people, Chinese people now here among us in the United States. So we really have to look at this. We really have to sit back and say, you know what? Can we just take all that stuff out of everything that we all put up hands on one leg at a time? We all have eyes, we all have ears, we all breathe the same. We're the same. We are the same. We're all brothers and sisters. We really are. I know a lot of people don't like when I say that, and I don't understand that, but you know what? Whatever. That is how I feel. So now let's go on to this next section of the reading. First of all, I want to kind of teach you guys, for those of you who are interested, in how to take these ideas that we talked about and apply them to your own chart. So for those of you who know your chart, pull it up on your phone or grab it if you have it. Now, for those of you who don't know your birth time, is it's probably one of the biggest questions I do get asked is, what if I don't know my birth time? And a lot of people don't know their birth time, because if you don't have your original birth certificate and you call for a replacement, they don't put your birth time on it. I don't know why. I'm not sure, but you could try to request. It does depend on where you live. You can contact your local, whatever I guess whatever department of records would be was dealing with the hospital where you were born, that area. Those are the people, by the way, that you could probably get a copy of your original, right? But then the department, and then everything gets shipped to the Department of Records. So usually when we're like, oh, get my passport, I can't find my birth certificate, let me get a replacement, they just send you this one with your parents' names and where, but no time there. So a lot of people, long story short, they don't understand. They don't know what time they were born, but you could still run. If you do a 12 p.m. default, don't pay attention to the house placements because they're probably wrong. But at least you'll know your placements, right? You'll know at least what sign Pluto was in. You'll know what sign stuff is in. For the most part. Yes, you will know what sign everything is in. You just won't know the house placement. You won't know your rising sign, but there's value in the house placements as well. So you want to look and see what sign is your Pluto in, and you want to look at that rising sign, right? So for example, let me give, well, you know what, I want to, let's go to, sorry, I'm like thinking out loud here. Let me go into shared screen with you guys. Okay, I'm going to do shared screen with a couple of charts. I'm going to do shared screen of the charts with the US. So this is the US, but let's go to Joe Biden's chart. Okay, let's just use this as an example. So even though Joe Biden is a Scorpio sun, so he was born at 8:30 a.m. in Scranton, Pennsylvania on November the 20th, 1942. So that makes a president a Scorpio sun, and his sun is in his 12th house. And it's in there in a pretty tight conjunction with Venus at 28 degrees. Mercury is at 21, and Mercury, so Mars. So he's got Mercury and Mars together. So he's got a lot of energies right in this 12th house. But anyway, so this Scorpio sun gives in the 12th house gives him a Sagittarius rising at 3 degrees. So as a Sag rising, he could expect to have this Pluto return transiting his second house. So President Biden's chart is mirroring in many ways, not in all the ways, but in many ways, the chart of the United States right now. So a lot of these deep transformations that are going to be going on a national level are going to be actually happening on a more interpersonal level as well with our president right now, which is important to understand. But now we look here and we're like, okay, so if he's a Sag rising, it's impacting his second house energies. Okay, good enough. But now where was Pluto in his birth chart? It's in his 9th house. So Pluto in the 9th house is Sagittarius's home, and it's ruled by Jupiter. Now, many of us do know a bit of a history, at least, about a lot of the pain that President Biden has gone through regarding his family, right? The passing of his family many years ago, and a lot of the challenges that he's currently struggling with, having to do with his son, right? So it's very interesting that who rules children? Leo. What house do we look at to understand the connection of father energy? Father energy, guys, a lot of people say it's 10th house, it's Saturn. Saturn is father time. We do glean a bit about father sensibilities as far as the impact of father on us through Saturn. We do glean some information as well from the sun. Sun rules Leo energy. But we look at the 9th house to say, what kind of impact did I as a father, or what kind of impact did my father as a father have on my life? And that's where we have to look at that 9th house. And so what I see in this with Pluto and Chiron, his deepest pain at 28 degrees, he has suffered significant pain and change and transformation and a lot of cycles regarding the energy surrounding his children. And we could see that. Now, because his natal Pluto, our natal Pluto is going to be triggered in this Pluto return. It's not only the house it's transiting, our personal Pluto energies are going to be triggered. So there's going to be some sort of transformation in as far as how he's considering himself as father, right? And now we look at his fifth house. His fifth house is the home of Leo, and the transiting Chiron in Aries wound, it's the wound of self, is transiting his fifth house of children. And this represents what's going on in the life of his child right now. His child is going through an exposure of wound of self right now. So there's going to be a lot of pain that's going to be rolling out right now, reflective of something that happened in the past. And so, I mean, this is pretty direct, right? But going back to connecting this to your own chart. So as you can see, as a Sagittarius, so regardless of what you said, what your rising sign is, you want to, I'm going to indicate in the description box below what rising sign, what house each rising sign is going to have Pluto transiting. So that'll be helpful. If you know your rising sign, you can see that. If you can't grab your chart right now, but then look at the house where Pluto is, and then look at which house is, which rising sign puts Pluto in the ninth house, and that would be Taurus. So this is very important because there's going to be a lot of nurturing and a lot of, I have another list of it right here. Let me just double check. Yeah, Taurus. Yeah, it's Taurus energy. So Taurus risings are having Pluto transit. So if President Biden were here, or if you were listening, I would say, okay, Pluto is transiting your second house, but also look at what it means. Look at the Taurus rising interpretation, because that puts Pluto in the ninth house. Okay. Does that make, I hope that makes sense to you. So if, let's say if you're, if you find your Pluto in the first house, regardless of what your rising sign is, you have to look at what is Pluto in Capricorn, because Capricorn risings are having Pluto transit their first house. So we have to understand that. So do that first. So look at what's transiting, look at where it is in your chart, if you know your house placements, and then you can look in the description box below and say, okay, which rising sign puts Pluto in this house that my Pluto's in? And you can listen to that part. You can understand it from that point, rather. And then finally, we have to understand Scorpio in all of this. Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. So, and it's Scorpio in President Biden's chart is in the 12th house. In the United States chart, it's in the 12th house. So that's Pluto ruled, right? So we have to also understand what's going on there. So right now, we all know that wherever our Scorpio energy is, we have the south node of the moon until the middle of July. So we're going to have a lot of change, significant change and significant transformation over the next 18 months, especially in those areas. So there's going to be a lot of make it or break it energy, guys. You know, so for example, let me just give, just for, I wasn't going to do this. I was going to say, hey, if you want me to do a separate video on how this is going to be impacting everybody on a more personal level, let me just see this note here. So Aries, you guys are going to have the Pluto return, as I mentioned in my last video, in the 10th house. So there's going to be a lot of, if those of you who have Pluto in the 10th, or if you're in Aries rising, you're going to be feeling this in your 10th house. There's no question, having to do with career, public reputation, standing in the world. Some of you may be getting married or getting a divorce. Some of you may be changing careers altogether, changing where you thought your life was going. Taurus energies, again, having to do, if you're a Taurus rising, or if your Pluto is in the 9th house, like President Biden's here, you're going to be feeling this in your 9th house. So big changes. And as far as, you know, obviously in the way that you could, for those of you who resonate with this, if you're a father, if you're a male, the way in which you parent. But the 9th house is also your belief system, your religion, your personal philosophy, your moral code, importing and exporting, travel, higher education, laws as well. It's another way I think that this is going to be implemented by President Biden as well, because there's going to be a lot of new laws put in place as well by him. But it's advertising, marketing, all modes of negotiating. So a very important period for a lot of you who are Taurus risings, or if you have Pluto in the ninth house, expect a lot of changes, excellent energy for those of you who are looking to go in a different direction and start up something new, right? Whether it's a belief system or whether it's a business, it does look good. Now, Geminis, Gemini rising, or if you have Pluto in the eighth house, this is going to be really big because it's actually in the home of Scorpio, which is the south node. So there's going to be so much change in how you show up as a we in everything. So whether it's relationships, how you share money, this could be huge transformation in the life of a partner in the way of finances. But completely changing maybe how you show up in relationship, sharing resources, sharing intimacy, sharing communications. This could also indicate significant changes in your finances, having to do with debt, having to do with taxes, having to do with, now this could also indicate huge windfalls, particularly for those of you who have maybe been in a very tight situation. That could be what ends up transforming itself. That's quite likely because it brings in something new. It's something new. So, and this is not to say that those of you who are doing quite well are going to end up destitute, but just expect that there's going to be some sort of shift, some sort of financial shift. So some of you could simply be resonating with this as maybe you're going to decide to sell all your property. Right? I mean, that has to do with that cyclical stuff. Some of you have a huge windfall having to do with an inheritance situation. So there are many ways that could end up manifesting. Cancer energy. So if you're Cancer rising, or if you happen to have your Pluto return happening in your seventh house, Pluto in the seventh has to do with relationships and contracts. So you're going to be seeing a lot of huge changes in the area of your marriage, in the area of your closest relationships, anyone that you have a soul purpose, soul shared contract with. And really, guys, that could be a close friend, a family member. But because it's the house of contracts, we do include the contract of marriage in there. But also business connections. So there could be a huge business opportunity that comes in, or a big change in a business situation that you have going on. So expect that. That is the seventh house. And also seventh house is also your clients and your customers and your patients and your followers and the people, you know, who you engage with on a soul level, as far as like even your work goes. So there could be some big changes in that area for you. And now Leo, we have you guys on the sixth house. So if you're a Leo rising, or if you have Pluto in the sixth house, there are going to be big changes potentially in the area of your health, mental, physical, emotional. Could also be big changes in the area of your day-to-day work environment, what it is that you're doing when you get up, you brush your teeth, you go, you do you, whatever it is, all of that could be changing. And there are many reasons that could change that, whether it's you're moving, or whether it's you're changing jobs, or there's just a significant change in your day-to-day, and that's going to end up bringing a change to the way in which you problem solve and the way in which you handle situations that come up in your life. So there's a lot of changes going on for our Leo friends, that is for sure. So next one is Virgo. So if you are Virgo rising, or if you have Pluto in your fifth house, so you have some energies coming up here having to do with changes regarding the life of your children. So maybe some of you are maybe your kids at this point are like maybe getting ready to, you know, finish high school and they're going to college, or finishing college, or getting married, or starting families, or, you know, relocating for jobs, or anything like that. Obviously could have something to do with that. But it also has to do with romance, falling in love, love affairs, creativity, entrepreneurial efforts as a result of creativity. Big changes here, big changes here. So I think that's very exciting for you to have it in the fifth house, actually. And then going on to our, okay, wait, I'm sorry. What did I say here? So Leo is sixth house. Virgo is fifth house. I hope I said Virgo. So big changes there, Virgo. I don't know if I said Libra. I might have said Libra. My apologies there. But anyway, Virgo is the fifth house, right? Having to do with falling in love, love affairs, romance, changes in the life of your children, creativity, entrepreneurial efforts, good stuff. Libra, you're having it in your fourth house. Sorry, guys, it's a long video. So Libra in the fourth house, or Pluto in the fourth house, big changes on the home front. Some of you are going to be moving in, moving out, welcoming somebody new in. Libra, you guys are ruled by Venus. Fourth house is Luna, is mother. It's ruled by the moon, which is a mothering energy. So some of you may be welcoming a new child. Some of you may be making the decision to get divorced and move, right? There might be changes where the person that you're living with, you're no longer living with, or however the change can manifest in that point, but it's going to be very, very different than what it is that you've been living now. Going on to our Scorpio friends, or Pluto in the third. So big changes in the way in which you communicate. And I know you're like, what does that even mean? Well, there's going to be an update. And I feel like a lot of this has to do with the fact that you guys are the south node of the moon right now. And so Scorpio risings in particular are going to be realizing that they want to change the way in which they communicate in their life. There is a lot of recognition where it's like, no, you know what? A lot of Scorpios are just going to be called to just be the best version of themselves. And there's going to be this recognition of, maybe I shouldn't speak to so-and-so this way. Maybe I shouldn't be so this way or that way. And maybe I should be more of this, right? So I feel like that is one way that this is going to end up transforming you. The third house also does rule your siblings and extended family. So it could be a transformation in the life of a sibling or extended family member. This is also doing business as, in a very basic fundamental level. It also rules your neighborhood, your neighbors, short distance travel. So there could be big changes in your neighborhood where you live. You might be deciding to move to change your neighborhood, or there could be changes going on a local level for you there. Next up, we have Sagittarius. So yeah, I mean, this is the energy of Sag risings, right? So Sagittarius rising, or if you have Pluto in the second, which a lot of this video is dedicated to this. So a change in all of that, right? A lot of change in your finances, changes, and a lot of you are going to be really looking at and letting go any sort of potentially negative ancestral patterning that's been going on, changing the way in which it's changing the way you eat, changing the way you take care of yourself, taking much better care of yourself. Really good stuff there. Finally, Capricorn. So Capricorn, well, not finally, we have another few. Capricorn rising, I'm saying Capricorn's its first house for you. This is a big deal for Capricorns. There's no question that Scorpios, Capricorns, and Taurus energy are definitely going to be feeling this energy the most. There's no question there. So for you guys, it's going to be in your house of self. So if you have Pluto in the first, or if you have Capricorn rising, big changes in your physical appearance. A lot of you can be, oh my gosh, I mean, a lot of you can be changing your physical appearance, changing your hairstyle, changing the way in which you dress. Maybe you're getting some surgery done, whatever you're doing, do you, be you, right? But it's going to change the way in which you actually meet the world, and it's going to change the way the world sees you. And for a lot of you, this is going to be from a very visceral level where you're sort of just changing your whole perspective, and you're realizing what you want and don't want anymore in your life. And that's huge. That's huge. And a lot of you are going to be going through a very cathartic stage of self-forgiveness and, recognizing your beautiful points and really trying to grow those areas. So I think that's nice. Aquarius energy. So if you're Aquarius rising, or if you have Pluto in your 12th house, so big change in your unconscious behaviors. This is such a deep energy, Aquarius. This is like crazy. Because remember, this 12th house is the subconscious. It's spirituality. It's also, and let's understand the 12th house, because it's kind of two minds. On the one hand, it's very sacrificial. So where do you feel like you've been sacrificing yourself in your life? Where you've been keeping yourself small? That's got to change. But for a lot of you too, it's also the house of self-sabotage, addictions, unhealthy boundaries, allowing them in your life, or exercising them with other people. It's going to be big changes there for you. And so but that shift is going to come from your subconscious. It's the shift is on a very foundational level, which I think is amazing. And then finally, Pisces. So if you're Pisces rising, or if you happen to have Pluto in the 11th, big changes are going to happen with your friendships. Where you thought your life was going, it's not going in that direction, Pisces. I'm sorry. It's not, because the 11th house has to do with goals and gains, your 10-year, 5-year plan, 10-year plan. We're still going to be having this Pluto return there. So where you thought your life was going, If you think back to 2008 and then every, kind of where you have thought your life was going up to this point, guess what? The tracks are changing. And I think ultimately it's going to be for a good thing. I can't say strongly enough though how important it is to just stay open to all of this for real. So guys, long video. I hope it was helpful. Going to chapter it out. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope this was helpful, informative, fun, something, whatever for you guys in some way. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I hope you guys have a beautiful Pluto return. Please put in the comments what you feel happening already. I'm always very interested to read those comments. You guys take care now. Bye-bye.